Welcome to another edition of the Boxed Out podcast. Courtney Robb, Tom Bevel, Chris Bolton, and joining us today is current Chicago resident Steve Robb, my father. And we're talking about The Last Dance. The first two episodes premiered on ESPN last night. We're bringing in Steve to get some perspective from the greatest city on earth, Chicago, Illinois, during the time.
Current Chicago resident.
Current Chicago
I am
resident.
here.
What a CG.
And actually, what's great about it, not only am I here, but the old Bulls practice facility, the Berto Center, is in the town that we live in, Northbrook, Illinois. So,
Nice.
Before we start things off, when the Bulls had their dynasty in the 90s, Steve Robb did not have this miraculous goatee. And I need everybody to rank the goatee on a scale of 1 to 10.
this is kind of like a playoff, when the Hawks are out playing for, in the playoff, they have their playoff beards. So this is my pandemic goatee. And we'll see when we get rid of this stuff that we'll end up maybe shaving it off, or if we get such critical acclaim for it, we'll keep it on.
It's a very solid goatee.
Thank you.
What does your wife think of it, Dad?
My wife is liking it, so that's kind of tipping the scales right now. So,
Scottie Pippen would be proud.
Well, Dad, last night we were texting back and forth while we were watching, and within the first 20 minutes, the first thing you said to me was, I forgot all of the politics that were involved with this. What specifically did you what was being said at the time that you remember, but maybe didn't come back up until you watched last night?
In the first three of the playoff run, you didn't feel like the politics. I didn't even remember some of the things that they talked about, like his second year when he busted the foot. I do remember the Boston game and a couple different unbelievable scoring that happened in that first game. But the stuff that really kind of resonated with me was that whole Jerry Krause stuff at the end. Jerry got a little bit too big for his own britches, if you will, and started thinking he was this amazing architect of it. And yes, he had a great piece with Scottie Pippen and some of the players that he was able to make some moves for. I remember when, some of the players were traded and we got like Cartwright in and made that second run happen. But you forget all those crazy politics. You forget, the Scottie holding out. You forgot a little bit of the, how low he was paid. And you also forgot about, how much Jordan was, how much he reshaped everything. It was just, it was bringing back such fond memories last night. I couldn't wait until now the third and fourth one. So I am going to make sure I record it just in case, for some odd reason, I'm not in the house. But it was an amazing show, and it brought back some great memories and actually even reminded me of some things, hanging out with my roommates when they won the first championship.
Yeah, Dad, I asked you how young you were when the first championship was. For reference, how old were you during that time?
That was great. I was 23 years old when the first championship was, when they won that first championship. I was in college when Michael, came on the scene. I mean, just imagine, you're a 19, 20, 21-year-old college kid, and you're living in a town that all of a sudden becomes, the mecca of basketball. And then when I was 23, I'm living with two other roommates, and we're watching the game, and it was unbelievable. We after they won the championship, we all packed up, jumped in my car, drove into the city, which was about 30 minutes away, and stood out with, literally it felt like millions, but it was probably, tens of thousands of people just walking around the downtown area, everybody coming out of the bars, everybody enjoying it. It was pandemonium, and it wasn't, there was no violence. That's the one thing that I remember very different than like when the Pistons, I think, won where there was like this, a lot of violence was going to go on. And when the first Bulls won, it was just joy. It was a lot of fun.
Dad,
Let's say the first Bulls championship was before I was born, so I appreciate this
Same.
unique perspective because, like, for us, like, we knew of Jordan, like, we obviously, like, we caught, like, when I first fell in love with basketball, it was the tail end of Jordan, the Wizard years. So, like, I mean, I was like, what, 6 years old when they won their 5 years old when they won their last championship. The biggest thing that stood out to me was about how Jordan changed the Bulls from basically a doormat to a team that was making the playoffs. You know, everyone compares the Jordan and LeBron. It's almost similar to the fact that LeBron resurrected a doormat Cleveland team back when he was drafted, but Jordan did the same thing with the Bulls.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference was that, you take a look at the size of Cleveland and you look at the size of Chicago just as a physical city. And Chicago is just such a huge city, and there's only one basketball team. We have two baseball teams. Granted, we have one football team and one hockey team, but it wasn't something that anybody really cared much about. Prior to Jordan, I think the leading scorer for the Bulls was Bob Love. And, and a lot of people don't even know that name.
It's like, who?
Yeah. He's an ambassador for the Bulls today. And I think he might still be one of the top 5 leading scorers of all time in the Bulls history. But, it was, what was so crazy about that time is how everybody in the city kind of like galvanized around the Bulls. And this is when it was the old stadium too, the true, crazy, the madhouse on Madison. And all I can tell you is I was lucky. I was very fortunate. I was 23 when they won the championship. Their second and third championship, I was making a little bit of money and had, friends of ours, were getting tickets because they were working at certain jobs, and we were able to get tickets. And I remember going to see a game, and I had really pretty decent seats, probably second balcony or first balcony, second rows up. And to watch Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, like, what people don't realize about Scottie Pippen is the man was unbelievably fast. He had a stride to him and the speed that it did not translate on television. Especially, remember, television today is so much better with 4K, high resolution, great cameras, all the stuff that we have. It was good back then, but it was nothing like what it is today. So when you would see those guys in person, and it was amazing to watch. I just remember watching the Bulls with their run and being there. There were 2 things that I remember about that is Jordan being so amazing, and then Scottie being just so fast. And it was clear when you're at the court. The other thing is, take a look at some of those old footage. You'll see all of those funky sweaters. Everybody had sweaters with like 50 colors on them. That was like the big thing back in that time. And they used to call it the sweater club. And that was the guys that had a ton of money, were down near the court side, and they had the sweaters on. The bankers and the guys that made decent money were in suits in the second level, and then everybody else was way up top. But the sweater club was all the big money guys in Chicago at that time.
what's interesting too is they mentioned this was how it kind of transformed Chicago from being all about the Bears after their 85 Super Bowl, and then the 90s come along and Jordan transformed everybody into being around basketball. Like you mentioned, it wasn't that big of a deal in the city up until that point.
Yeah, no, it wasn't at all. And it became just huge. And it became not only the city. I mean, Jordan was just an amazing, and still is. I mean, he's an ambassador like nobody else is. There was a lot of interesting things. I mean, there wasn't some of the social media, so there wasn't all the scrutiny. The players were actually all pretty decent. There wasn't a lot of jerks on the club. I mean, you had Rodman in the second round that was, a wild man, but, in today's world, he would be nothing. Everybody's got 50 tattoos. But yeah, it transformed the city like nobody else's. And we all used to do that too. We'd go, especially in the first run, the first 3 playoffs, it was like you and your friends would meet up at the sports bar 2-3 times a week and to go watch a Bulls game. I mean, it was just like, hey, let's go have some wings and watch a Bulls game. And that was like the normal thing to do all the time. So the sports bar, there was one out in Schaumburg called Joe Spencer's, which happened to be a guy from Minnesota who's a sports player, I think, for the Vikings. And he ended up having this great sports bar in Schaumburg, Illinois. We used to hang out there all the time. And it was just, that's where you went. The sports bar, the true sports bar named after a person, you don't see as much as you used to see. But it was like common. We were always going to have wings and watch the Bulls.
Looking back at how was it as ludicrous back then as it seems now that they were pretty much trying to force Phil out, the man who put this all together on the floor and kept all the personalities in check, as it seems today, because they could have still been winning.
Oh, well, and you got to realize we already went through one of those scenarios with the '85 Bears. I mean, if they would have kept the '85 Bears together in '86, then we would have probably won a second Super Bowl. So this town was not happy with Krause, Reinsdorf to a degree, but he kept himself a little outside of that. But yeah, Phil was, and he proved himself later as well, an amazing coach. And I think what you just said was probably the reason. He was able to take personalities. He was able to get the focus. And, that 6th championship probably was more because of him than almost Jordan, in my opinion, because he got everybody to focus on the last stand.
Dad,
Follow up to that. Did you ever go to any of those hockey games that they said sold out the arenas more than the Bulls did prior to Jordan getting there?
Oh,
what
yeah.
was the team name? The Shamrocks, or what was the ice hockey's team name?
Okay, you're lucky that you're on a video conference, because the Black Hawks is what you're talking about.
Well,
yeah.
the ones before. Well,
are you talking about the soccer team?
Was it this indoor soccer team?
I thought you were putting a dig down on the Blackhawks.
No.
No,
It's like, did they change their name? I was like, there's no way they were the Blackhawks. I didn't realize it. But the indoor soccer league, that was before Jordan put them on the.
Yeah, I never went to one of those. Soccer was not a big thing of mine. It was probably, quite frankly, the only reason that they had success with the soccer league and the indoor soccer league at that time was because this is a pretty huge melting pot of people in Chicago, and we have very, very distinct ethnic communities here, and because of that, a lot are from places that play soccer an awful lot. But I don't even remember them, to be honest with you. I remember all the other stuff, and I know the current soccer team and some of the things that they're doing with soccer in Chicago today, but I don't remember that at all.
Dad, you were a man about town in the 90s. Would you say so?
I guess.
I would say you're a man about town now, honestly. But you used to always tell me growing up, Scottie Pippen was known as No Tippin' Pippen.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and I felt bad when I was thinking that last night too. It's like, yeah, Scottie Pippen, no Tippin' Pippen. Everybody well, I'll give you an example. There's a famous restaurant and bar in the downtown area that at one time was owned and named after Frank Sinatra's bodyguard. And the guy that was, I think he was part owner and manager, he actually had a session where I was sitting outside with Bob Love and talking about some of that stuff as he was running for a political office in Chicago. We were talking about Scottie, and Scottie had a little bit of a bad rap, but when I saw that show, I'm thinking, well, God, Scottie had a bad rap, but he was the 122nd highest paid, player at that time, and he was clearly the number 2 player, if not top 5 at least, in the NBA. So he was definitely taking advantage of it. It wouldn't happen in today's sports. I think the management team in today's sports would have renegotiated and locked him in and made him feel good. Reinsdorf was an attorney. That's what he did. He owned, he was that kind of a businessman where he's like, sign the contract, then hold yourself to it. So Yeah, Scottie was known for that. What I remember Scottie doing, and this is the weird thing about professional sports, when they weren't as big as they became. Like the NBA became big during that period of time. Guys used to own like car dealerships. Larry Bird has like 3 or 4 car dealerships in French Lick, Indiana. You'll see the Larry Bird Chevy station. And I remember Scottie Pippen had, I think, a Dodge dealer in Chicago. It was like Scottie Pippen's Dodge. These guys are trying to find any way that they can make money because it wasn't until like you saw the Nike, deal with Jordan and some of that Spike Lee commercial, which they haven't shown, but I'm sure they'll show in this 10-part miniseries, because that was also groundbreaking to have a great director direct a commercial, and also in his case to be in it. So, but it was a very different time. People were doing small appearances. You would actually see the Bulls out. Jordan opened his own restaurant. What was also notorious at that time is, Michael was known to be a little bit of a card player, and obviously a golfer and loved to gamble with that too. But supposedly at that time, he had like a special room in the back of his steakhouse or his sports club, had a giant basketball out front, and there was known to be some of the best card games in the city. But I wasn't that big of a man around town that I got a chance to go play. And quite frankly, I didn't have the bankroll to do it. So,
Dad, looking back, was there anything that shocked you from the documentary that you didn't realize was going on at that time, or was everything they put out common knowledge among people who were around the Bulls?
Yeah, I think it was mostly common knowledge, except for the one piece that Tom brought up about that soccer team. I had no idea that even existed. But most of the other stuff was pretty front page news. They were the marquee of the city. The Bulls were the #1 team. The Sox hadn't really gotten strong at that point for their run. The Bears had waned and were not after the '85 Bears. They weren't nearly the team, and so the entire city embraced it. The other thing about basketball, which is a little bit different, is basketball runs during a period of time which is we're all looking for something to do when it's cold. Football season has ended. It's January, it's February, it's March. You got basketball and you got hockey. And in a town like Chicago, you're going to sell out the stadium if you have a good product, because people want to go and do something. And so the stadium would sell out. Now, granted, the Blackhawks used to sell out the stadium almost religiously when they were even decent, and it's because they never had home games televised, because that was the ownership's policy. And the Bulls didn't have that. They were, I think, mostly on WGN, or the other thing that popped up is they had Sports Vision as one of the local broadcasts. And I want to say they might have even had some games broadcast on this early, before cable boxes came out, called On TV, where they used to do some local broadcasts and some movies and stuff.
Has the city forgiven? Oh, go ahead, Tom.
Oh.
No, Chris, you go.
I was just going to ask if the city has forgiven Jerry Krause yet. Have y'all allowed him back into the gates of Chicago?
The most hated person since Carol Baskin.
Yeah, I think anybody from that time has no desire to see him ever again. Now there'll be a whole new crop of young people that are watching this documentary, and they'll be like, oh, if I ever see that Jerry Krause guy, even though they don't remember it. But yeah, Jerry's not a beloved person in this town. And the one thing about Chicago is, they talked about it in the documentary, that a lot of the folks in Chicago feel that, we've got a strong work ethic. We're a little bit of that blue collar. We got a fighting attitude about us here. And yeah, you don't want to be walking the streets if you're Jerry Krause after dismantling that team the way that it went down.
And it's it's very sad because he was a great GM. I mean, you draft Jordan, you draft Scottie, Horace Grant, you sign Tony Kukoc, you make trades for Cartwright and others. He was good at his job. He just got too caught up.
Yeah, he got too full of himself. And I think there was one guy, it might have been Pax, when he was talking, where he said that Jerry, literally had the, I think they called him the short man complex, and that he really was upset that he wasn't front stage, that everybody wasn't giving him credit. I think he said in the documentary some things about it's all about the team. Well, absolutely, it was all about the team. But if you didn't have Michael Jordan, you couldn't have done the other pieces. I mean, he was that special of a player. I mean, you look at those special players, and there's a handful of them that have been out, throughout history, and they can transcend a team. They can elevate it to such a new level that you don't normally see that. Even when you get a great player, there's great players, and then there's those uber elites. And I was lucky. Remember, I had Magic Johnson, I had Larry Bird during my period of time, I had Michael Jordan. I mean, I actually remember that 65-point game. I remember watching it, and the place that we were at was just going electric because it was in Boston, and it was on their court, their special court out there, and everybody was thinking that they were just going to get rolled over, and Michael threw that game up on his shoulders and just tore it up. It was unbelievable. I mean, just think about if you saw somebody take a game at a playoff game, not a regular game, and when you take the 8th seed up against the 1 seed and put it on the shoulder of one man, and he scores 65 points like he's unstoppable. That's what it looked like, and that's what it was. It was truly amazing.
Two things about that game that actually interested me the most was I looked back at the box score of that game. Michael Jordan didn't attempt a single three-pointer in that 63, I think, 63-point playoff game. He didn't attempt a single three-pointer. And then the interesting thing, too, is I don't know if, everyone always talks about Eastern Conference now, about how it's a weak conference. But the Bulls got in with Jordan when they were 30-52. What was the Eastern Conference like back then, where a team that was without Jordan plus games got into the playoffs at 30-52?
I remember that, like they said, the Bucks were good, and that was a team. I don't remember some of the other ones. I remember, the big rivalry later was the Pistons. I mean, that was the Bad Boys, and they were. When you see, I guess, more of this miniseries, you're going to see the fights that used to go down. I mean, it was like you felt like when you were going to a Bulls game, if you saw somebody from Detroit there, you might actually walk outside of the stadium and get in a fight. That's how it felt, And it wouldn't have been like, anything crazy. It would have been just fists. It would have been people just, we're the Bulls, we're going to show you. And that's how the team played on the court too. I mean, everybody, it was like a battle. I don't know. I have a recollection in my mind, and I don't know if it was that game, the 60-plus point game, or if it was another one where he scored 60-something points. But I remember Michael Jordan having the flu once. And they thought that he was not going to show up. And he all of a sudden scores 60-some odd points. I mein, I can't remember who said it last night. They said that every single game that Michael played was like it was like he played it at the highest level every game. And I mean, we've all been sick, and we've had the flu, and we crawl ourselves into bed, and we just want to drink our juice and have our chicken noodle soup. And this guy's going out playing up against the most elite athletes in his space and lighting it up while running 102 temperature. Just think about that. It's just seriously amazing athlete. But it was also that collective team, as you mentioned. And Jerry Krause did make some unique moves. I mean, I think Tony Kukoc was one of the first high-drafted European players, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And Chris Bolton, #1, Tony Kukoc.
I love Tony Kukoc. I can't wait to see how they mentally, verbally, physically, spiritually abused my boy when Scottie and Jordan matched up against him before he signed with the Bulls. I know that's going to come up in the documentary.
Yeah, well, you know, the one thing I think that everybody on that team, if they're honest with themselves, would say, and you started to hear a little of it from a few of the players, but they made each other better. Michael pushed people to a limit that they would have never gone to if it wasn't for him and his drive. And quite frankly, Scottie made Michael a lot better. So I think that, you know, a player like Tony would have been a great player, but at the level he got to, I'd bet anything it was mostly because of being on that team. You know, Horace Grant, would he have been the player that he became? I have no idea. I doubt it. I think that, you know, when you take a great talent and people that are smart about their respective, you know, field, and you put them and you surround them around great people, everybody elevates. And they had some of the best people on that team, including arguably one of the best coaches, and they were able to elevate that team to a place that, you know, is history.
What I thought was funny was how Jordan mentioned his hiatus from the game of basketball to go and play. We all know it was to go and play baseball. Dad, at the time, what was
and changed the number? Remember, he changed his number too.
What
was his number during that? Hold on. What was his number during that period of time? Remember?
No.
45.
45. Yeah. That, I mean, nobody would ever, you know, nobody would want to remember that, but yeah, it was 45.
Dad, what was the reaction from people when Jordan announced he was leaving and then everyone finds out he's going to play baseball?
Everybody kind of knew, and this is again where the social media wasn't around, so it didn't take off in a negative way. It was just kind of like, all right. So Jordan was gambling on a bunch of stuff. Maybe he got caught. He needs to take a break. He got to deal with the NBA. He's off playing baseball. Oh, let's go watch him do that. Next.
So, Dad, you believe the conspiracy of?
That's what everybody in Chicago believed at the time. Everybody that it wasn't considered a conspiracy. It was considered to be that's what happened. Michael got busted. They cut a deal. They put him off to the side. He plays baseball. He comes back. I mean, that's kind of the way everybody thought it was going to be. So, yeah, I mean, they didn't think it was anything but that, Court.
So, Dad, your favorite memory from that Jordan period, and we'll wrap it up. If you had to, what's your most favorite Jordan or Bulls memory from that dynasty era?
I think the image I have in my head is him taking off from the top of the key and with the legs open and the tongue hanging out, and him just doing a slam. I mean, it looked like he was climbing. It literally looked like he was walking up a set of stairs, and that was air. Hence Air Jordan. So if I have an image in my head, it's that slam dunk. And it was just
the dunk contest against Dominique.
Yeah.
That was in Chicago.
Yeah. And go back and watch him when he does that. I mean, just think of anybody that's ever played basketball, even if you're out playing on the courts outside, and you always want to be able to dunk. You know, I'm 6 feet. I can touch the rim back in the day. But I could never dunk.
Humble brag.
Yeah, no, I can just touch the rim, barely. But to see a person take off from basically, you know, almost near the top of the key and then stair step up and with one hand just slam that thing down. There was no twist, there was no turns, it was poetry in motion, and it was like it was the today of dropping the mic. I mean, he just did that. He could have just walked off into the sunset, and everybody the stadium would just continue to erupt. I'm surprised that the one thing I would say that I'm very proud of the Chicago fans is that, you know, they didn't light the stadium on fire because it was just such pandemonium sometimes, but everybody was so joyful. It wasn't, you know, anything negative. But
Yeah,
that's probably my biggest memory. And my second memory is of that day of downtown after they won the first championship, 1991. Me and my roommate Bill Breedlove were sitting outside on the street. We walked into a liquor store to buy a 6 or 12 pack. I think it was 6-pack of Bud Tall Boys, and all we did was shake up cans and spray people on the street, and people were like, "Yeah!" I mean, that was just how much fun it was. There was, again, it wasn't a lot of craziness. It was just people enjoying it and having a great time. So those are my two probably biggest memories.
Dad, how many times would you say I watched Space Jam as a kid?
A couple million. Yeah. And it's funny. There's I think it might have been. Well, I mean, and that was just a great movie. I mean, you got Michael Jordan and Bugs. Really?
Exactly.
It's the greatest two. That's a combo that you can never ever, beat. Especially to a big Bugs fan like myself and a big MJ fan. Hey,
Bill Murray was a role player.
Yeah. Oh, and here's a little history for you, or a little side note, Courtney. So the restaurant Carlucci's in Chicago that I go to so much?
Yeah.
The guy that owns that, his wife, unfortunately passed away, but his wife was I think she was the administrative assistant to Jerry Reinsdorf. Last name is Berto. So little touch of getting close to greatness, where I know somebody whose ex or passed away, deceased wife, they named the Berto Center after her. And that was at that time, that was where all the practices were for the Chicago Bulls till they moved it downtown.
That's pretty cool.
I think sometimes people don't understand, especially Chicago at that time, as big of a city as it was, had a small town feel to it, and everybody kind of knew every which restaurant and who owned who, and the big name.
We still kind of do, Court.
I know. Well, that's very old Chicago.
We still know who the guy is that owns the restaurant. We're still right now, I just gave out a bunch of gift certificate cards to some friends that own restaurants here in Chicago, because they're struggling. A lot of those restaurateurs are struggling right now, and we're trying to do our best to support those folks, because they are, to a certain extent, we have some great memories of either being in that sports club or knowing, having an amazing pasta dish after a game, or what Chicago's known for is great pizza while watching the game.
And just so we're all clear, deep dish pizza is the superior pizza.
And just to be also clear, you might be getting a special gift for me for your birthday.
Oh, you love to hear it. All right, Dad, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys. Hopefully I brought a little bit of color to a great time in history.
I would say you did.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Bye-bye. Great shirt again.